Welcome back. It's Steve from Featherlight Studio, and this is part 2 of Steinberg's brand new Cubase Pro 11 upgrade. In the previous part 1 video, we covered some of the impressive effects that are now in Cubase Pro 11, so if you missed that, you might want to go back and check that out. Here in part 2, we're going to take a deeper dive into some of the new instrumentation. We're going to get into some of the cool content that's been added, some of the new workflow enhancements, and check out some of the new extensions like Spectral Layers. We're back on our track view here, and now we're going to jump into the brand new sampler in Cubase 11. So we're going to go up here in our track view. We're going to enable the lower zone, which currently pulls up the mixer, and this would also be our editor or whatever else we're working on, but we're going to go to the sampler control tab, and we're going to come into our track view up here and grab a sample, or a clip rather, out of our track. This can be anything. It can even be VST instruments. Cubase will automatically mix it down and then drop it into the sample player window. For the time being, we're going to grab an acoustic drum clip. So we're going to drag that literally just into the sample window. And it's done a couple of things. It's created a new track here for us, so we're going to turn the monitor button on so we can hear what we're doing. And then it's also opened up the entire subset of all the sampler controls that we now have access to. So the first one that we're going to do is we're going to come down here to our audio warp and slice window, and we're going to choose slice. And it's going to automatically slice up our samples based on this threshold slider. And this can be as little or as much of the sample slices as you need, and then you can add and subtract what you need from here. So for example, by hitting the Option key and clicking, we can add more slice points, or we can take them away depending on what we need. So we could go through here and create a bunch manually. After that process is complete, you'll notice a little keyboard down here in the very bottom of the tab view area. That's auto-mapped our slices to our keyboard, and our external keyboard can now literally play them as an instrument. And if we want the fade out, for example, not to click or pop when we release the key, we can up the fade out amount. So we'll choose about 8 milliseconds. And now it's a nice clean start and stop. And this becomes a completely playable instrument across our external keyboard instantaneously. This is super powerful, especially if you're grabbing things like vocals, or you're grabbing things like drum tracks or bass lines. By the time we add in, for example, like all the pitch modulation tools and the filter modulation tools and the amplitude modulation tools, there's a ton of stuff to go through here. But just a quick overview of just how powerful this is. There's a ton of potential here in Steinberg's new sampler instrument. Cubase has also added a ton of new sample content to the libraries now. So if we go over here and engage the right zone, things like Bloom and Tech House and Hard Knocks and Night Call and LoFi Dreams and Noir, these are all fully fledged libraries with just a ton of content. Bloom, for example, has a lot of vocal stuff.
Nowhere to go. Speed up.
The new Tech House, LoFi Dreams, and Hard Knocks libraries offer a ton of new EDM, hip-hop, and vintage vibes to explore. And if you have the button down here, Engage, which is aligned beats to the project, you can simply just drag and drop right into your... We'll drag a few in there. And they're instantly aligned to the project tempo. There's a ton of musical stuff in here. Let's grab that and drop that into the project and just hear what it sounds like against the backbeat. Cubase always had a lot of great content to go with it, but this has just really expanded what's available now. Great ambience, background stuff. Some of the stuff really reminds me of the Trent Reznor Arrhythmia library, and that was one of my favorite all-time sound design libraries to play with. And these 6 libraries are huge and varied and add a ton of stuff that you can add to your projects. Lots of grooves, lots of rhythmic and tempo-based stuff. So let's go down to Noir, which is one of the really interesting ones. And this is just a ton of cinematic hits and things. I mean, that's just a Marvel movie waiting to happen. All right, and that's all included in the brand new update. So those 6 libraries, Bloom, Tech House, Hard Knocks, Noir, which is all the cinematic stuff, Night Call, LoFi Dreams. There is a ton of stuff. We'll definitely do a video on just that expansion library because there's so much stuff in there. It would be impossible to go through in a quick overview video like this, but definitely check out that new expanded content in Cubase 11. One of the other areas that Cubase 11 has really focused in on improving and changing is the MIDI enhancements area, and specifically how it relates to chord theory. So we're going to come up here and solo just the drum tracks themselves and come down to our Halion Sonic track, and we're going to solo that. And currently right now what we've got on here is kind of a Rhodes vibe going on. And that's going to work really well for the song that we got. Our song is in F minor, but what if keyboards aren't your primary instrument? What if you don't have a background in theory? What if all those things, are still fairly new to you and you're still learning those things? Well, Cubase has you covered there as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our pencil tool and we're just going to draw in like a blank MIDI event here. And normally when we would click on that, that would open up our MIDI event or our piano roll style editor. And if we expand this a little bit, we can see that it's a blank event. There's nothing going on here yet at all. But if we go over to our inspector tab, we notice that we have a brand new tab to choose from, and that's called Scale Assistant. And this really opens up some super powerful things that we've never really had to work with before. So, for example, let's say we already know that our song here is in F minor. So we can set the key of the song here. So we're going to set it to F. And then we can choose any of these scales that are available to us, including no scale at all. Or we could choose harmonic minor. So we're going to go ahead and choose that. If you look on the background of our piano roll editor, you'll see our grid here, which is divided up in bars. And then behind that, you're going to see light gray and dark gray horizontal stripes running along the background. If we choose, for example, after we've chosen the key of the song and the relative scale we want to use, if we choose Show Scale Note Guides, watch what happens. Keep a close eye on the background of that alternating pattern. When I click this, you'll see that actually changes to a different pattern. So that's the regular default, and that's the changed pattern. And what this is showing you, all the light gray horizontal lines are the notes that are allowed in our harmonic minor scale, and all the dark gray ones are not. So when you're placing notes and you're editing things, for example, we click on here, this is a visual scale to let us know that those 2 notes right there are not in the scale. Now we can put that in there if we want to. This is just Cubase's way of letting us know we're going to assist you and let you know that those 2 notes right there, for example, are not in the harmonic scale. Now, if we want to click the next one here, the snap pitch editing box, look what happens when we move our note up and down. You can see that it's jumping over those dark gray horizontal lines that are not in the scale, and it's only allowing us to place the note on the right notes in the scale. This is a huge help when you're trying to figure out which notes may or may not be in a scale. Maybe you don't have a big theory background and you want to put some more complex vibes and chord voicings into your work, but you're not entirely sure how they go. You can pick whatever scale you want. You can click that snap pitch editing button and input all the notes. And no matter where you move it, it's going to fall in the correct scale. Super powerful stuff here. But Cubase goes even further than that. We're going to go ahead and unclick that right now. So now it's not going to put the notes in the right spot. We're going to go ahead and add a few other ones. And these may or may not be in the right areas. You can see some of them are falling in the right spots and some of them are falling on those dark gray areas, which are not. If we select all those notes and come up here to quantize pitches, and we click that, watch what happens to these notes. Now they're all automatically moved onto the closest relative pitch that falls within our F harmonic minor scale. We're going to go even one step further, and we're going to engage this Snap Live input. But before we do, I want you to take a look at my hands on the keyboard. So currently right now, I'm going to play an F triad. And then I'm going to play a B flat triad. So in other words, a major chord, and then a B flat major chord, and then a C major chord. All right, so I know that none of those chords, just from theory, are going to work in a harmonic minor scale. But if I click this Snap to Live input, watch what happens when I play those exact same chords again. It's automatically taken all the notes I've played and forced them into the right scale, whether I'm playing the right notes or not. So if you look up here and we play every single note, those two notes are the same notes. And now those two notes are the same notes. And those are. And those are. And what it's doing is it's sort of like Autotune for keyboard players. Maybe you don't have a really in-depth theory background, but this is going to help force those notes into the right scales for you automatically. Now we can come up here, we can arm our track, and we can play anything, and it's going to match the right scale. All right, so now it has automatically adjusted those notes so that they play the right notes in the right scale every time. All right, that's Steinberg's brand new scale assistant, and that's about as close as we're going to get to Autotune for keyboard players, and it's built right into Cubase 11. Steinberger's also revamped some of the automation control, and it's a welcome change for sure. In our project here, we're going to solo our drum track and just our bass line. And this is a pretty simple bass line. If we expand the lanes here, you can see it's got a little bit of automation for a pitch bend. It's not bad, but it's not exact, and we've got some problems with it. So if we expand it here, you can see pretty clearly when we wrote the automation, it didn't land back smack in the middle. So when it lands back here, it's a little sharp, it's out of pitch, and the automation itself is pretty messy. This is pretty typical of how most automation ends up getting written. You got a ton of steps here. If you have a lot of these, it bogs down your CPU pretty quickly. So now we got some new tools to kind of fix that. And the first of which is our Bezier curve controls. Those are the little nodes that show up when we hover over the line. So for example, this used to always default into this hard right angle, which is great for things like hold pedal information, but it's terrible for things like pitch bend because you don't want those abrupt changes. Now the Bezier curve overrides that and turns it back into a regular Bezier control curve. So we can override those hard edges, and we weren't able to do that before. That's pretty handy. One of the other big changes, as you can see here in our track here, we didn't land squarely on the pitch. We actually kind of landed a little sharp. And that simply means that the controller on a MIDI controller maybe is a little off, or it's calibrated a little wrong, or the spring's getting loose or whatever, and we end up with a little bit of a sharp pitch right here. Well, now we can click our settings dialog, and we can click to show the semitones grid, and that's definable. That means we can choose how much up or down we want to see as a semitone grid. So for example, right now, it shows it up and down in increments of 2, and they can be linked. We can choose to unlink that box, and then we can have one, the pitch band on the bottom go lower than the one on the top. So this is pretty standard stuff, but it's nice to have that control. Right now, it still behaves the same, but it gives us those visual indicators. So for example, that's a semitone up 1. This is semitone +2, -1, -2, and so on. But it doesn't still allow us to land on it. And it would be really handy if there was something that would snap to that. And finally, there is. That's what this little snap indicator icon right here does. Now, when we write our controller information and we grab to change it, it will snap to the nearest value. This is a super handy feature when you're working fast, and you need to make sure that that lands back on the natural pitch precisely. All right, and one of the other big controller feature upgrades is that now we can change the state or the type of controller information that we're writing. So for example, the default is step, and we've already kind of seen what that produces. Lots and lots of little nodes here. And that, like I said, can kind of bog down your CPU if you end up with a bunch of automation tracks. But now we have ramp to choose from, and this is a far faster way to do the same thing. This means that when we enter nodes in here, it'll automatically create ramps for us in any place that we put the nodes. So we can create really quick and really accurate ramping information. And then we still have all the Bezier curve handle control that we did before. And then you can see as it gets sharper as we pull it farther out, it gets smoother towards the middle. We can create some really complex and logarithmic shapes easily from here. We still have the line tool that's available to us, and so we can grab and draw those as well, but it's so much faster to be able to grab those and control them with some sense of precision as opposed to just kind of blindly landing on stuff. And it allows us to simplify those things a lot more. We don't end up with all this kind of jagged step information. So the marker features have also got some improvements in Cubase 11. If we're working on a big project, especially with a lot of folders and they're open and we're trying to work on something down here lower in the project view and we have the markers enabled, sometimes that was pretty hard to see where they were. So let's go ahead and show our marker track. We have our markers for the intro, the verse, the solo sections of the song, and we've colorized them. And now we have these corresponding colored lines that are visible all the way down through the bottom of the project track view. Those descending lines make it a lot easier to align things and to sync things up, especially when you have high track counts and you're working at the bottom of the project area. So even if you have more complex grid settings or adaptive zoom settings in your project work area, it's still relatively easy to pick them out because of the color. So a welcome addition and definitely a time saver. Another Cubase 11 enhancement is in the area of notation. So Cubase's score editor app now picks up some tips from its bigger, full-fledged scoring application, Dorico. To help illustrate this, we're going to use a jazz song that we're in mid-composition on for a wonderful Northwest artist. Her name is Pam John, and this features some beautiful trumpet session work from the renowned Mr. Greg Byers. Sounds like this.
Gonna miss me.
All right, so this is a pretty straightforward song. It's got some pretty interesting arrangement and orchestrations in it, and to illustrate that, we're going to go up and we'll select the piano track here and then open the score editor. And we usually end up with something like this. So this is pretty chaotic, and if you try to read and play this, it would probably be pretty difficult. So what Cubase has done, if we click on this little rectangular box that follows the staff lines here, we can open up the properties of our particular score project here. And we've got our 4-tab box at the top here that opens up all the relevant features for each one of the tabs. And here we can really go through and change and clean up a lot of this stuff. So it's important to note that this setting specifically is not changing MIDI information. It's just making things more legible. If we start moving notes around on the staff or changing keys, we're altering the MIDI information. If we know that the smallest amount of notes we intended to play were 16th notes, then we would insert that and say the smallest rest was a quarter note and those kind of things. So we've gone through and adjusted all the different pages and parameters to make this particular score a lot more readable and a lot more legible. And now we have access to the expanded presets system that allows us to take all these pages and store them as a preset. We've already done that, and we have one here called Someday. And suddenly we end up with a heck of a lot more legible version of what we intended to actually have it end up in the score editor. In addition, Cubase has added some things that are context relative. So for example, if we click on the treble clef here, now we have a context relative menu system that opens up the properties box specifically for what we've clicked on. And this context sensitive click behavior has really simplified a lot of things. We can change our keys directly from here, for example, both treble and bass clef. Time signature information, bar lines, all of these things have a context-sensitive box that relates directly to it. So note types, for example, we can open up those, and then if we want to change the actual size of the note itself or the scaling, we could change that up to 200 and the note would be considerably larger. Whatever the changes that we make here, if we want to restore them back to default, we simply hit that. So a lot of workflow enhancements and streamlining has really made the score app editor inside of Cubase 11 a lot more productive and fun to use.
Push me around.
Cubase 11 has also made some really powerful improvements to the export audio dialog box. So first, let's go up to the File menu and choose Audio Mixdown. And a lot of stuff has been improved here to make our lives easier. So the first thing is selecting channels, for example. If we choose the multiple channel export button, we can sync our channels between our selections. So if we have drums, for example, and then we want to add cymbal swells and some drum audio percussion, maybe a Hammond B3 in there, some brass tracks. All that stuff gets synced with ours. So that makes selection a little bit easier as well. A really big important feature has been added to simplify our life. And this is our ability to select things and make them into jobs in the queue. So let's expand the export queue. So say, for example, in this particular setup, let's go ahead and deselect all this stuff. All right, so we're going to choose just our regular output channels. This would be a standard mixdown with our relevant settings here on the right-hand side. If we want to add that to our queue, we simply click the Add to Queue button. Now, maybe in this particular configuration, we want individual stems, and we want to be able to do maybe our drums and our bass and our guitars, solos, keys, brass, vocals, the regular stuff that you would set up for stems. All those selections, including all the different configurations on the right-hand side here, can be its own separate job. We add that to the queue, and now it's going to do that particular job. Now, let's go back and change all those things. And let's say this time we want individual track information. So we scroll down here and we choose maybe a couple of individual tracks that we want as guide tracks, or we want just effects channels as a mix down. Well, we can do that and add that to the queue. This is super powerful because it means we can set up all these individual stem exports and bus and track exports that would take us forever to do one after the other. This can be completely unattended, and we can set up these and all have different configurations for each one of the jobs. A huge and powerful improvement in Cubase 11's export audio workflow. Next up, we're going to take a look at the brand new extension inside of Cubase 11 now, known as Spectral Layers. Now, Spectral Layers is its own powerhouse editing program for stereo audio and other kinds of audio that's independent entirely of Cubase 11, but for the first time, we have a version of it hardwired into Cubase 11. So let's explore a little bit more about what this can actually do. All right, so we have a 2-track audio file here, and this is a bed track with what's known as a pitch vocal on top of it, which means the vocal here works as an example, but it's not going to be the final vocalist because this bed track or this musical example is actually going to be pitched to another artist. Media houses and songwriter associations and things like this work with pitch vocalists all the time. So in this case, this is an example of that. The song sounds like this.
Push me around, tell me to keep my feet firmly on the ground, but with every little dig.
All right, so in this particular example, this is a 2-track audio file. We don't have access to the multi-track files any longer, and we may need to, for example, remove the vocal from it to put the actual vocalist in the track later on down the road. And finally, we have a way to do that with a lot of precision. So we're going to select the track, we're going to come up here to Audio, and we're going to come down and choose the brand new Spectral Layers extension in our menu choice here. And this is going to open up Cubase's own version of Spectral Layers. Now, we could go way into a deep dive on just all the stuff this can do on its own, and we will in a future video. It would take way more than we have time for. But basically what it does is it gives us a graphical representation of our 2-track audio file. So what we want to do is we want to remove the vocal or isolate the vocal from that file so that we can continue processing or working on this 2-track file. So we're going to come up here to Layer. We're going to come down here to Unmix Vocals. For the time being, we're simply going to leave it at 0 and choose OK. And then we're going to see the little progress stream up there, and it's unmixing the stems as it performs in the background. We'll let it do its thing. All right, it's done mixing down, and you can see that it's added 2 separate tracks here under the main folder. So now our tracks have been separated. We have the background music bed track and independent from the vocals track. The vocal track is the one that's highlighted in light purple here. Now we have the background bed music track completely isolated by itself. And you can hear the vocal track as well. Now this opens up some really interesting possibilities, and we could play with that sensitivity slider to try to zero in on the exact setting that works best for our project, especially this one because the original vocal had a lot of mid-side processing going on that affect phases and that kind of stuff. And that's notoriously difficult to isolate from a bed track. But this has done a great job of isolating it from just the bed track itself. All right, so now that we have this much more powerful app to use, we're going to put it to work and do some more complex mixing with it. So to illustrate that, we're going to click and drag on the bed track file by itself, and we're going to put that up here into track number 2. And then we're going to do the same thing with the vocal track. We're going to take that and we're going to drop that in to our audio track number 3. And then we're going to go ahead and close out the editing window. And now this brings up some post-mix possibilities that were never possible before. For example, right now, if we simply wanted to record a brand new vocal over the completely isolated background bed tracks, we'd be good to go. But what if we wanted to remix the track with the existing vocal and possibly even add new processing? We can simply go down to our fader here. If we needed to drop the vocal of the lead, bring it up. Now we have individual processing control over the lead vocal. So for example, we could put a de-esser on there. Take a little bit of the top just off that. We could add a compressor to that to help level out some of the dynamics.
Push me around, tell me to keep my feet firmly on the ground, but with every little dig,
add a little bit of tonal control.
The hotter the fire burning deep down in my soul. Just one little match.
Now let's take that one step further and start adding vocal ambience and delay tracks to the original vocal that never had it in the first place.
Put me down, push me around, tell me to keep my feet firmly on the ground, but with every little dig.
All right, let's bypass that.
The hole, the hotter the fire burning deep down in my soul. Just one little match, gonna set up all this flame. Then it's red hot, mama, and baby you're to blame, yeah.
So as you can see and hear, this opens up a whole new world of mixing opportunities, especially for remixing or for dealing with material that's just 2-track information where you may not have access to the multi-track files any longer. This and so many more under-the-hood improvements that has made this new Cubase 11 update so incredible that we just don't have time to go through all of them. But if you learned something or if this was helpful in any way, please hit the subscription and notification bells, and we will catch you guys in the next video.